And to the second part of my question, which is if you had to guess or you had to tell us how
Hmm.
close we are to to unlocking the robotics equivalent of AGI, right? Where you have robots living and working alongside human beings in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
How far away would you say, if you had to take a punt at what that might look like, how far away would you say we are from where robots become a pervasive part of our everyday reality?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because, I mean, I could be off by orders of magnitude, but just for fun, I think if I the cl again the closest data point I have is like LLMs, right? So if you look at, I think ChatGPT came out in I don't know, like 2022 or something,
Mhm,
2021
mhm,
maybe,
mhm,
I don't know,
mhm.
something like that. And I think it took it's gained a lot of popularity, and I think it happened in like that even that popularity rise happened in 2 to 3 years. I think right now we haven't even seen the GPT-1 moment of robotics. So what I mean by that is GPT, I think GPT-1 was something that could kind of do like a lot of different NLP tasks.
Mhm, mhm.
GPT-2 was slightly better. GPT-3 was something that you could have a conversation with. And then GPT-4 was like almost indistinguishable from a human.
Right,
So
right.
I think in and again there's a lot of engineering and research that went into each, but largely it was basically how do we get more data better and develop better techniques that scale, like improve the model with more data. And I think right now, yeah, we haven't even reached GPT-1. So if you
Mhm,
kind of
mhm, mhm.
look back at whenever GPT-1 came out, I don't really know, but it'll take, in my mind, the amount of time it took to go from GPT-1 to GPT-4 or GPT-5, that's the lower bound. Like that, it'll take at least that long to get to like general purpose, like as you said, like iRobot type of a situation. And then you can argue that, hey, robotics involves not just software and AI, but also hardware, right?
Right.
Which is like its own rabbit hole. So it very well could be like twice or thrice that, but I think in my mind it would be, yeah, minimum GPT-1 to GPT-5, however long that took.
Got it. Understood.
Yeah.
That's a super helpful perspective to have, and I think anchoring it with reference to how to think, how we might think about GPT and what it's done on the software side in general, I think is like pretty interesting. Maybe a couple of other questions that I just had in mind to set
Yeah.
the stage a little bit, right, in terms of the landscape. So if you think about robotics from a demand and supply standpoint, right, like on the demand side, the factors that are driving adoption in some sense. And then on the supply side, we're seeing immense investment with companies like Figure AI raising, very, very large sums of money, more than perhaps anyone ever has in the history of robotics as a field. Investors are incredibly exciting. There's a very large number of startups that have popped up and are building. And I think every other week, you see demos of humanoid robots and other forms doing tasks which even 5 years ago would have seemed like absolute like sorcery, right? I remember when I was in college, people were trying to fly drones, they were trying to drive autonomous cars, and none of those things were very good, right? Like they could perform within a narrow range. Even then, they had massive issues on reliability, controllability, and so on and so forth, right? But now it looks like things have changed to a significant extent. So, give me a little bit of a sense on the demand side. Why are people increasingly looking at robots for the home, for the workplace, and so on and so forth? And on the supply side, I know you mentioned a little bit about how figuring out machine learning has really made a difference. But a little bit more broadly, if you have a perspective on how investors, how the broader startup ecosystem, how founders have been thinking, why are people so excited? And why is everyone getting into robotics at this point of time? Would also be helpful to understand.
Yeah, I think I Shoot, I forget who was telling me this, but um, I think maybe it might have been one of my previous coworkers from China, but he was telling me that um, at least the okay, so it's he was saying that China is really interested to make robotics work because they have a huge demographic problem that their population is getting older and they don't have they don't know what they're going to do. Like I think other countries are kind of maybe relying on immigration to solve that issue, but like China doesn't have a big influx of immigration, so they kind of have to solve it with robotics. Japan is kind of in a similar situation. So in fact, that's why like in the 80s and 90s, like Japan used to be a leader in robotics. It's kind of I mean, it still does good work, but I would like to see it do. I think it's capable of doing much more, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I think that's like a big motivation is just like world demographics and labor shortages. Like a lot of industries are facing labor shortages. Any person you talk to, especially in like blue collar jobs, restaurant workers, factory workers, things like that, they all have problems with um, uh, labor shortages, skilled labor. Um, and I think it's also one of those things that, you know, if at a global level, if like certain countries are investing heavily in these advanced technologies, then to maintain your competitive edge, other countries also need to invest, right? So like Europe has jumped in, the US has jumped in. So yeah, I think it's that's definitely one major part of it. The second, of course, is what I was mentioning, which is like the exponential growth of AI. So people have seen that the I think before it was unclear how to improve robotics. Like as you mentioned, like that, hey, if you're flying a drone or a self-driving car and it fails in certain situations or it doesn't do make the right decision, it wasn't clear how to improve it. Like you could go in and like tweak some rules that okay, in this situation do this, but you know there are so many endless possible scenarios about edge cases and things, other long tail scenarios. So I think moving to data driven AI kind of gives you a very easy, or not easy, but it's a simple strategy, which is that all you have to do now is like if you have an algorithm that gets better with data, you just scale your data and compute. And yeah, I think I've also heard a lot of people say that kind of post COVID, they were very afraid by how fragile the global supply chain was. So, or how much we still relied on humans being in physical spaces, right? So, when you had this pandemic that was like that kind of wouldn't allow people to be actually close to each other. It just showed that how much if despite all our efforts to digitize and have a digital economy and things like that, it was just still extremely reliant on humans. So I think that's also something that people are like not. I think it's not a major concern, but it's definitely something that people are starting to think about, right? And then finally, I think um, I've also seen a lot of like in the previous companies that I've worked at, I've seen a lot of new markets open up. So markets that perhaps weren't as big earlier. So, for example, at my previous company, it was a startup called Bloomfield, where I worked on robotics for precision agriculture. So that was basically our customers were like big robotics, or sorry, big agricultural companies that grew, you know, like hundreds or thousands of acres of land. They owned hundreds of thousands of acres of land. They grew a lot of crops, and they were like, "Hey, we have no idea like what's going on in our field. Like which of our crops are working, doing well, which ones are not. Even just like monitoring them takes so much manual, so much manpower. And so we would provide them with solutions where like we would build cameras and things like that that would monitor the entire field and give them like a digital clone that they could just look at on their computer and see that, okay, this part of my field is doing well, this part is not, and like I need to allocate, water, fertilizer, whatever. So anyway, that's just one example. There's, so much work going on in healthcare and like surgical robotics, elder care, again, due to like aging demographics. There's like retail, like if you look at, things like drone deliveries, that's actually, that's also something that's driven by consumer demand, right? Like people are like this wasn't something that I think had a lot of value before, but now people are interested in getting their like Amazon deliveries quickly or groceries delivered quickly, and cheaply. And that's something like even I saw DoorDash has released like a robot that they've wanna like use to deliver um, people's food, right? And then you have drone delivery, like Amazon has been testing drone deliveries and things like that. Um, and then what else? Yeah, construction. Construction is a big one. People are using like autonomous forklifts and things like that. Mining. So it's just like so many industries, I think, are getting like um, they are reaching that point where they could also benefit from physical scale, right? Like how
Got
do
it.
you, if you can
Got
scale
it.
up physical labor. So yeah, and I think maybe one final thing I can think of is governments are also catching up in their regulatory, like they are being more lenient, I think. Like if you just look at even the in the Bay Area or in the US, the government is giving more, they're willing to work with autonomous driving companies to help them test uh to make technology better, but also keep the citizens safe. So I think that's also been another thing which wasn't possible 10
Got it.
years ago.
Got it.